Hello everyone, this is AJ, you're with the Mighty Gluestick channel, nice to see you. So here it is, the video I've been pondering for a while, an introduction to an ecology of the gods. Hopefully I can start to focus a video on each of the major gods and those powers of note in the realms. So along with monster ecologies and exploring locations, we shall take a tour of the gods of the realms. Now, this being the tail end of 2017, I feel the need to add a disclaimer to this video. I'm talking about a game. A fictional setting for groups of friends to engage in fantasy, structured storytelling, imagination. The story is the setting of the worlds of Abeir-Toril, Kryn, Eberron, Oath, Nerath, Mystara, Erebrinus, Athos, Nerwan, and all the planes of existence of the Great Wheel of the cosmos of D&D, and they're all make-believe. They're an incredibly elaborate story told by thousands of creative writers over many decades. This tapestry of story draws on thousands of years of folklore, myth, and legend from the entire world for these stories. Many of these themes, the names of things, have more than one source and more often than not are combinations of elements brought together and elaborated on in order for the players of the game to create their own stories of wonder and adventure in make-believe realms. The lore of these sources comes from rulebooks, sourcebooks, guides, manuals, novels, and articles and date back for many decades. If you find that you feel threatened by imagination and make-believe, then stop here. Do not watch this, do not listen to it, do not comment on it. Just be on your way, my friend. I do not seek conflict, offence, or a debate on your beliefs. I wish only the best to you. For those that find no problem with the ideas of make-believe gods and mythologies, welcome. In the last couple of editions of D&D, the idea that gods came from the astral sea has become more solidified in the lore of the game. As we know, the astral sea represents the realm of thought, dream, potential, creation, and the desires, hopes, and aspirations of living beings. It is a higher dimension. If I can get technical for a moment, we could represent the material universe as a low-frequency energy wave. The peaks and troughs of the bands would be miles apart. The other realms, alternate realities, where the world is called Kryn or Athos, is a different frequency within the same space. The peaks and troughs only rarely interact normally, and higher still, with the peaks and troughs much closer together, we have the planes of the Great Cosmic Wheel. These intersect the peaks and troughs of the material realms here and there, and then we go higher into the ethereal and astral realms. These ultra-high frequency waves intersect all over the place. Thus, within the realms, the ethereal and astral are often used as a gateway to the other realms. So here is the first concept of gods and Dungeons and Dragons. They are of a higher frequency, therefore they naturally intersect with more than one plane of existence. In order for a being who did not start out as an astral entity to attain the state of godhood, they must somehow raise their frequency to this higher state constantly and be able to mentally function in more than one realm of existence simultaneously. This is a hallmark of the gods. So to picture what this is like, imagine a wall of monitors, each showing a different scene from a different time and location, and how your attention would be drawn to this or that. But for the most part, it would be a haze of activity, and only a sudden change in any one monitor would draw your focus from one to the other. Otherwise, you would just sort of wander your gaze around. If each scene was a different reality we were actually existing in at the same time, this is what a god experiences. We actually have some solid game lore on this and the mechanics of just how aware the gods are of what goes on in the realms of influence, and it's amazingly in tune with this idea of a pan-dimensional being that operates through a medium of collective thought. So what are the listed abilities of the gods that we see in print? It very much depends on the ranking and magnitude of that god's presence on the plane in question, and by the plane, what I'm talking about is its dimension. Each of the realms is in fact an alternate dimension. When your characters plane shift, they're not exactly moving anywhere, they're just changing frequency from one band of the cosmic radio to another, changing stations as it were. So you could imagine it's like a colour. The world of Abeir-Toril would be a deep blue. Then as the plane shift spell or portal is active on the body of the character, the colour changes and they go from a deep blue to a light green, and hey presto, they're no longer interacting with Abeir-Toril anymore, they're walking around on Kryn. Planar travel, by this mechanism, is much simpler than time travel. which would also involve space travel as the planets move around stars and the stars move in the galactic rotation and galaxies move through the universe. Even a few minutes of time would see the planet move hundreds of thousands of miles. And we know teleportation across distances is far too limited for that sort of transition, so it's effectively impossible to move through time in your character's own dimension. Otherwise, you'll be walking in space. The workaround, if you must have it occur for your plot to work, is that the characters simply plane shift to a very similar, almost identical alternate reality, a parallel dimension, where the universe is in the right location, but everything happened a little bit earlier. The complication is that an alternate version of your character is already there. However, temporal paradox is completely avoided, as nothing done in the past of the parallel dimension can affect the past of the character's original dimension. They are from a whole separate reality, even if it doesn't seem like it. Rick and Morty, the cartoon, is great for this. But I digress. Or do I? Gods exist in multiple dimensions, and they harness the only energy that travels and intersects between dimensions, the energy of thought, psychic power, the prayer and worship, belief and faith of their followers. One aspect of divine power is the ability to sense whatever is going on around those who worship them, to a greater or lesser extent. We'll cover that in a minute. The way this ranking of the gods works is dictated by the one and only overpower that is known to exist in the realms, that is Ao, the overgod, the ultimate overseer of the world of Abeir-Toril. It is from Ao that all the other powers, all the gods, are derived. Gods are not born, they are created. While we use the word for the biological process, that's not what actually happens. The original powers were basically factions or fractions of Ao's power divided off from Ao and then developed into individual personalities. The entities that became the original gods of the Forgotten Realms, although we've had imports and changes since then. And these powers can actually split into two separate entities, such as when the Dragon God was split into Bahamut and Tiamat. There have been imports from other spheres, other realms of realities, alternate realities, and since then, but again, it was Ao who allowed this to take place, and it's Ao who can rise up, strike down, and dictate the rules to any other deity. They don't even come close to matching the power of Ao. The kind of entity that Ao is on an order of magnitude beyond even the greater gods. It's like, imagine I took a picture of my little toe and made a computer simulation of it, gave it a voice and a face, and watched it animate and do things, and then it got feisty and abusive and threatened me. I can change its code, switch off the whole computer if I want to. There's nothing that the program can do to me. I'm beyond it, and Ao is beyond the gods. He can literally switch them off. However, we have a hint in the literature that shows that Ao is not alone. There is a whole other hierarchy that governs the different universes, and Ao is just one agent among trillions of other gods governing a game that is vast beyond anyone's reckoning. Ao doesn't interact with mortals and rarely interacts with pantheons, but took a very active and heavy hand in an era that came to be known as the Time of Troubles. So there may be priests of Ao, but there's no true clerics or paladins of Ao that draw power from the overgod. They'd be drawing their power from elsewhere, associated gods. Ao's awareness is supreme. However, and there is no place in the realms that Ao is not watching. It's a sobering thought, but okay. We have a ranking of power that Ao created, and there are rules to it, so we can explore it. First rule, powers must have bodies. Physical incarnations in the astral sea. There are enormous islands of dead god flesh there, and in the celestial and infernal realms, the gods are physically manifest. Gods may die and be returned to life, but this is also governed by rules and set down by Ao, and we'll talk about that later. Second rule, there is a divine ranking. There are greater, intermediate, lesser, and demi-powers. Third rule, deities need the power provided them by worship to exist. One way for a power to die is for it to have no more worshippers. Fourth rule, nothing can raise or lower its divine status without Ao's approval. He has ultimate sign-off on anything. And there are divine territories. Your cleric's god is not the god of the entirety of Abeir-Toril. It may only be acceptable to publicly praise and worship that god on the continent of Faerun, but be outlawed in Mazdaca, Zakara, Karatur, Malharund, or even the jungle of Chult. Your cleric's god can still answer prayers, send spells and such, but if your character starts trying to convert the locals, their own god may reprimand them and put an immediate stop to this action, as to do so violates divine laws and agreements and would provoke a direct conflict between gods. There is a well-established divine turf on the world of Abeir-Toril. However, there are some contested areas of land, some largely unclaimed or not really established, and some sparsely inhabited places that nobody much cares about. Because gods need followers, so sparsely populated areas don't really interest them that much. So, what can gods do in the Forgotten Realms? What are their abilities and limitations? Starting off with the abilities of all known powers, these are the abilities they share. You could say these are the baseline traits that form the natural common ground of all the powers. They take them for granted. Within a pantheon of deities, multiple deities can share identical roles for certain topics, emotions, elements, ideas, and things. These are called portfolios. However, in such cases, no more than one power can ascend in stature to a higher rank than a demi-power, and in Forgotten Realms, deities, we see that the greater powers have clear dominance over the lesser powers, and that whatever energy they gain from their shared portfolios is what links these and empowers them to form these alliances and relationships. So the hierarchies of gods of fury, with Talos ruling over Auril, Malar and Umberlee, many of the gods of nature, with Sylvanus ranking over Eldath and Maliki, the gods of justice and duty, with Tyr leading Ilmater and Torm, and the gods of bardic knowledge, with Ogma leading Daener, Liera and Melil, for example. All powers, no matter their rank, by the will of Ao, are immortal. They do not age, but they can, under very specific circumstances, be killed. A topic that I know many of you are keenly interested in, so that will form the bulk of the next episode in the series, along with talk about the Time of Troubles and what that was all about. It's important to note that only other powers, directly or through agents, can actually kill other powers. Otherwise, they just disperse and reform after some period of time elsewhere. All deities can teleport instantly to any location of the same plane of existence, perfectly, no chance of error, as often as they like. All powers automatically go first in any initiative order if they choose. So, combat with them is always going to be on their terms. All deities can communicate instantly to any being over any distance in any form of language, and by any distance I mean even other planes. However, this excludes across time in the same plane of existence and very specific locations such as Sigil. They are operating on a frequency that intersects more points and more locations than any other non-deity being. Distance is a figurative term to them, a point of reference, not a thing that they are bound by in any way. So it's important to understand that they're not physically limited in the same way that mortal creatures are. They operate in a different material way to reality around them. All powers have innate mastery of magic. They can use any spell, any type, no components required, and they can improvise entirely new spells and rituals in mere moments. They can pass these on to their mortal followers. They have divine morphism. They can manipulate reality by force of will, and magic is what other beings perceive as the gods perform this kind of activity. It takes at least a +1 magic item to even harm a demi-power or lesser power, a +2 weapon to be able to harm an intermediate power, and a +3 or better weapon to be able to harm a greater power. They are immune to any sort of magic that would instantly kill them, drain life, disintegrate them, and so on. They are completely immune to wards and glyphs, although they find them interesting, or psychic powers not originating from another deity of their own rank or greater rank. They are able to grant an ability or spell of any level to their priests that does not exceed their own capabilities. It is through this trait that they provide magical power to priests, clerics, paladins, rangers, druids, and so on, and any being that can grant spells to mortal creatures must be at least a quasi-divine status. This includes high-ranking fiends, such as the Lords of the Nine Hells, and so on. Even though they are not actually gods, they don't need Ao's blessing to be able to bestow spell magic to their chosen servants. So all powers have those basic traits. Even so, there's many variations, and we'll cover those different types of deities later on, but the core abilities remain fairly constant across the board. Now, specifically, greater powers have additional abilities. They can travel to any plane except the prime material planes. Ao has decreed that the gods may no longer walk the prime worlds. They can teleport and plane shift anywhere else, though, except Sigil. So it's possible when on any plane, including the Shadowfell or Feywild, Elemental Chaos, Astral Sea, Ethereal, Celestial or Infernal planes, to directly encounter a god. And if they so choose, one can arrive in the golden fields of Elysium, and there, standing 1,000 feet tall, wearing gleaming full plate of incredible brilliance, sword so sharp that the wind keens as it flows on either side of the blade, a character would be face to face with the full manifestation of Torm, then find themselves plonked on their ass back in the material plane without any sensation of movement whatsoever, and a stern voice that echoes in their head saying, "Thou shalt not traverse this blessed paradise wearing Crocs on thine feet." As you would expect, they can assume any form, even of planetary proportions, animate or inanimate. They have no limitations on this. They do have certain limits on creating avatars of gods that they have absorbed into their own being, however, which they can do. So they must manifest them as they were. This is again due to Ao bestowing divine power on specific entities. It cannot be modified but through the ascent of Ao, as I mentioned. Even if that power has been consumed by another power, the other divine power may be absorbed, but if they manifest it again, it retains its original form, powers and such, even if its portfolios can't be altered. But obviously they're not under their own will or control anymore. They are 100% invulnerable to magic cast by mortal creatures, 75% resistant to the magic of deities of lesser ranks, and 50% resistant to the magic of other greater powers. The sensory powers of these beings is incredible. They are aware of everything going on in their plane that they occupy. Only a power of equal rank block their perception. Anytime a worshipper speaks their name or title, or whatever name that is on that plane for whatever that worshipper is, they become aware of that any goings on that plane, even after a year after that name is spoken. This extends to any plane of their allies and their worshippers, or any holy relics dedicated to them or their allies. They can create any object, animate or inanimate, that they can think of, though this process does drain them somewhat. The guideline is pretty simple. Per ton of material produced, the deity must rest for 10 minutes. Greater powers can also destroy. They can kill any mortal creature with a thought and restore it to life just as easily. This effect can be countered by any greater power though. They can create up to 10 avatars of themselves and operate simultaneously across multiple planes of existence. If one avatar is destroyed, they can form a new one in a day. There are really very few limitations on their cognitive abilities or the actions they can perform simultaneously. They're capable of having thousands and thousands of interactions per second, conversations taking place at the same time across great cosmic wheel. Intermediate powers are a step down the rank, but are still potent entities. Though no match for the greater powers, they are very far beyond even the greatest mortals. They only fail saving throws on a roll of a natural 1. They can assume any shape as long as it is not bigger than the biggest example of its kind. So they can be a cockroach or a mountain if they choose, but not a cockroach the size of a mountain, if you see what I mean. Intermediate powers are 95% resistant to mortal magic, 70% resistant to the magic of deities of lesser stature, 50% resistant to the magic of other intermediate powers, and 25% resistant to the magic of greater powers. Like the greater powers, they can travel anywhere except Sigil or the prime material plane. Their sensory powers are a dramatic drop in range compared to greater powers. They can sense 100 miles around their current position, around any of their or their allies' worshippers, anyone who speaks their name or title, or any holy object dedicated to them. The effect persists for 1 month after a person speaks their name in that location. And again, this awareness can only be blocked by equal or greater powers. Their creation powers are more taxing and limited. 10 minutes of rest is required per 100 pounds of material created. The object must be a duplication of an object that they hold, provided they have sufficient material at hand to produce the object. They can't directly cause the death of a living creature, but can, by conventional or magical means, arrange it. So that's pretty simple with their spell power and things like that. They can just disintegrate things. They can raise the dead with ease, though, even those that have been dead for a very long time, decades, centuries, doesn't matter. They can reincarnate the entire physical form. They can create up to 5 avatars and move them around the planes. It takes them 7 days to create an avatar once it is destroyed. They are less able to multitask, able to perform on average 100 tasks simultaneously at a time without any undue strain. Of course, as many intermediate powers are closely allied with greater powers, they can ask for assistance where required, and so many of the limitations are not so cut and dry, but for comparison they're interesting. Lesser powers are usually in service to other powers. They are the lowest of the upper tier of divine power, who govern the providence of portfolios of the powers and the power they confer. Keep in mind that the gods require faith and belief to grow in power and maintain their status, so portfolios are all about the mysteries, hopes, dangers, and rituals of things. A fishing boat crew that prays for good weather and full nets feeds divine power directly to whatever beings are granted the sea portfolio by Ao, and all the powers and gods who share the portfolio divvy up that power among them. Lesser powers have access to that sort of power, but are again an order of magnitude below an intermediate power, and so no match at all for a greater power at all. They can shapeshift into any animate object. They can look pretty much like an average version of whatever that creature is. They can add minor tweaks to add some sort of divine flair. Lesser powers shrug off magic cast by mortals 90% of the time, and they are 60% likely to resist magic cast by Demi-powers and Avatars, 45% resistant to spells cast by other lesser powers, and 20% resistant to magic cast by greater or intermediate powers. They generally still make all their saving throws, only failing on rolls of a 1 or 2. Again, they can traverse the planes at will. No barriers are very effective at blocking them. However, they still can't travel to the material plane or the city of Sigil. Sensory powers are limited to a mere 10 miles around them, or any of their worshippers or holy objects, or wherever someone has spoken their name or title, in which case they can keep sensing 10 miles around that location for 1 day, unless they are blocked by other powers of equal or higher rank. Lesser powers can't create or duplicate objects out of thin air. They can sense the location of an object they desire, or where they can get one made. Also, they can ask higher powers to create an object for them. They can also raise the dead, just like any other powers can, and perform up to 5 actions simultaneously without any sort of penalty. Lesser powers can only make 2 avatars and have them on the go at a time, and it takes a whole month to create one. Demi-powers are the least powerful entities in any pantheon. This is the entry-level rank that deities start off at. For example, if they've been recently brought back from the dead, they've been a mortal who's just been elevated to divine status, or if they either do not have enough worshippers, not sufficient, or they share their portfolio with a higher ranking powers. A good example would be when Vecna was first elevated, and I'll discuss him in a later video. So, demi-powers can shapeshift into animate object or of normal proportions that best suit their portfolio and nature. They have 70% magic resistance versus mortals, 40% resistance versus other demi-powers, and only 20% resistance to magic cast by higher ranks. They only fail saving throws on a roll of 3 or lower. One main difference is that demi-powers need to use the same sorts of means that mortals do in order to travel between the planes. So they don't travel around as frequently as the higher powers do. This is, when you think about it, a major limitation and difference between the lesser powers and the demi-powers, lesser, intermediate and greater powers. They know everything that is going on within 1 mile of themselves. Their worshippers, holy objects dedicated to them, or anywhere that someone has spoken their name or title for 1 hour. Demi-powers can't create or duplicate objects, and they must use conventional means to locate any objects they require, or they can just call on high powers to provide the object, which they would most often do. Again, they can raise any previously living mortal being from the dead. They can do this at will, no matter what the current condition of the body, but must be present there or have their avatar form there, or have a holy relic present in the location of the body to raise it. They can perform 2 tasks at once and could create and operate 1 avatar at a time, which takes a whole year to create. Some demi-powers never even use avatars, so it seems unclear if this is an ability they inherently know how to do automatically, or if it's an additional boon or learned ability. So why use avatars? Well, they are how the gods interact with the prime material plane, though it seems this still doesn't allow them to interact with Sigil, or perhaps they can send an avatar there but devoid of any special powers. Avatars embody only a sliver of the divine being's power. They are the same in regard to travel, communication and sensory power, plus they have the same resistances, though the avatars can be destroyed in a conventional way. Doing so is going to really upset the god, though, because avatars, after all, are a direct manifestation of the god. They're not independent servants. If an avatar is destroyed, whatever special items it has on it at the time are teleported back to the god unless the god wishes otherwise. Avatars are not restricted by attribute limits. They can wear armor for appearance sake, but their physical durability is divine, not reliant on the apparel. Right, we have a lot to cover, but this is a good introduction to how the divine powers operate in the realms, their hierarchy and abilities. I'll be returning to this series to bring you more specific information, turn the spotlight on the known gods, talk about their history, relationships and such. I draw my information from public sources. Most of the information presented here is from the Forgotten Realms Faith and Avatars by Julia Barton, Eric L. Boyd, Ed Greenwood, L. Richard Barker III, and David Wise. What a dream team. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll catch you again soon.